What up, Wizards? It's Dev. SPMTG, we like it in Magic, and today is a special day because we know every single card in Strixhaven now. All 275 of them, because we got the last, 11 this morning. We're going to go over all of those, plus some cards I missed, so we got 20 cards to look at today to finish off Strixhaven preview season. And it's been a journey up to now. This is a pretty cool set, in my opinion at least. I like a lot of what it's bringing to the table, and I can't wait to jam out the top 25 cards, top 10 sleepers, getting the lab work on deck techs and all that. So if you want to, you can sub to the channel, hit the bell for the notifications, make sure you get all that content. And also, if you want to, you can like this video, but only if you want to, only if you truly enjoy it. Oh, and last thing, before we finish off Strixhaven, get to these cards from today. If you missed Quandrix Day here on the channel, you can go over to Twitch, twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. We did Quandrix on stream, and it was a lot of fun, so check that out if you want my take on the Quandrix cards and you haven't seen it yet. Aside from that, consider supporting me on Patreon if you want to. $1 a month, let you vote on what decks we do in Strixhaven Standard. But aside from that, I'm pretty sure I got all the plugs out of the way, so let's go ahead and look at these cards. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with some of the stuff that we saw today, and then we'll look at the cards that I missed over spoiler season. And yeah, there's some Rares and Mythics in there, because this isn't the first time that I've spoiler seasoned, and I wanted to save some Rares and Mythics for the last day. But let's go ahead and get to some of the draft-centric stuff that we saw today. And there was no shortage of it, even though I think half of the cards that we saw from this morning are worth talking about one way or the other. But we'll look at Wormhole Serpent, Vortex Runner, and Stonerise Spirit first. Wormhole Serpent is 5 mana, 4 and a blue for a 3/5 Serpent. You can pay 3 and a blue to have target creature go unblocked this turn, which I think is actually not terrible in terms of limited, at least. In standard, this does nothing, obviously, but I do like these blue creatures in limited that have the ability to get through board stalls and finish the game. So every now and again, I'll take this, and it's got relatively high toughness too. But we'll move on to Vortex Runner. 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/3 human wizard. As long as you control 8 or more lands, Runner gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. So yet another one of these board stall breakers in blue that gets through unblocked, and you can suit it up or give it combat tricks and stuff, and there's no shortage of those in this limited environments. So I do kind of like this card as a pseudo finisher for a grindy limited deck that plays blue. I do like this thing, but having to have 8 or more lands is definitely a heck of a condition, and most of the time you play this, it's just going to be a vanilla 2/3, and that's not very good for 3 mana, so I'm not too sure how I feel about it, even in that environment. But we'll move on to Stonerise Spirit. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/2 spirit bird with flying. You can pay 4 and exile a card from your graveyard to have target creature gain flying until end of turn. That is not that bad, actually. I mean, I like it in limited where it's a somewhat solid 2-drop just because of the flying. I don't love the toughness on this. It's not going to trade too often with other 2-drops. It's probably going to die in combat too. Other 2-drops, which isn't a great way, does not make the card look very good when you look at it that way, but still, I do like that you can suit this up. Combat tricks work pretty well, right? It gets through for some damage, and then later on in the game, in limited, you can make use of your graveyard by getting a creature through with flying, and that should be pretty good. You know, you're going to activate that ability and not have that much more mana left that turn, I would imagine. You ain't doing too much else when you activate this ability, but sometimes it's all you need. I'm not saying the card's going to see standard play or anything, but I do like the idea of on turn 4, turn 5, you don't have much else to do with your mana, just get a creature through. Also looking pretty good for draft, we saw Biblioplex Assistant, Spectre of the Fens, and Snow Day today. Snow Day is, I think, our last school-based pun, I'm fairly certain. It's 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue for an instant. Tap up to 2 target creatures. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Draw 2 cards, then discard a card. It's not terrible. They give you instant speed too, but for 6 mana, this is probably way too much. And I imagine that if you tried to play this in standard, yeah, you get to freeze 2 creatures during your opponent's combat step or before they attack, and then draw 2 and discard 1. That's not terrible, but then, they just blow you out during their second main phase, play the thing they've been waiting to play the whole game. So 6 mana is probably priced out of standard, and it might even be priced out of limited, even though this is a very powerful text box. I do kind of like it. But we'll move on to Spectre. This is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 2/3 flyer. It's a Spectre. And you can pay 6 mana, 5 and a black to have target opponent lose 2 life, you gain 2 life. So another one of these, creature stall, whatever am I to do? I'll just pump mana into this and win the game over a couple of turns. One would hope, at least. In the meantime, maybe you're getting through with flying or something. So I don't love the stats on this. I got to tell you, 4 mana for a 2/3 flyer is not really where you want to be, but at least it does have some evasion. It can block when you want it to, and in the late game, maybe it gets some drains in, but I'm not too excited about it one way or another. But Biblioplex Assistant is kind of one of those cards that I do like and limited a lot. It's 4 mana, 2/1. 2/1 flyer. So if you didn't want to pay 4 mana for a 2/3 flyer, what makes me like a 4 mana 2/1 flyer? Well, it's an artifact creature, any deck can play it, so that's kind of cool. And when it ETBs, you put up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library, and I really like that in a format that is going to be largely based around Magecraft or instants and sorceries in one way or another, right? There's a lot of instants and sorcery synergies in this format, or maybe you get back a learn card and go get something else from your board or something in limited, so I don't know. There's a few things I like about this card. It's a 4 mana flyer that is probably going to be a blocking body, if nothing else. I mean, it can get through some attack damage when you need it to, right? Empty board, fly through with your assistant, that's fine, but a lot of times, this is 4 mana for a body that will block in the air and gets back a removal spell or a card draw spell or something to trigger Magecraft or whatever you're doing. So even though the card doesn't go into your hand, I do think that instants and sorceries, being able to effectively regrow them, get them back, is going to be a pretty important thing to be able to do in this environment. So I like this card for limited. But we also saw Divide by Zero, a super fake Remand today. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for an instant. Return target spell or permanent with mana value 1 or greater to its owner's hand, and then learn. So this is a little bit Remand slightly. You can have little of Remand as a treat, but that's all it is. I mean, 3 mana is a little bit too much. It is 50% more than 2 mana, and that's pretty bad. A whole turn you have to wait before you can cast Remand in Standard, and then even then you don't draw a card. You learn, which is I don't know, but at least you get to return a permanent sometimes to your opponent's hand, and that's probably okay. It's not even creature, it's just permanent. So maybe this card's a little bit better than I think it is because it's an instant and it kind of draws you a card. I mean, altogether, this is a ton of value, right? So at instant speed, even just dropping a card into your graveyard and drawing a fresh card while also affecting the board state or the stack is good. So I actually think this card might have some sort of stake in Standard at some point. It just does a lot of cool stuff. But here's a blue card I actually like way less than that uncommon we just looked at. It's Ingenious Mastery right here. Ingenious Mastery is X2 and blue for a sorcery. You may pay 2 and a blue rather than pay the spell's mana cost. If the 2 blue cost was paid, you draw 3 cards. Then an opponent creates 2 treasure tokens and they scry 2. If that cost wasn't paid, you draw X cards. So if you want to put X into this, it's just kind of a worse Gadwick in a lot of ways. Gadwick that you don't get a body off of that doesn't cost 3 blue. So it's much easier to cast than Gadwick. That probably matters in some of the control decks that might want to play this, but I don't even know the control wants this because it's a sorcery. So, I'm going to pump 7 mana into this and draw a bunch of cards, but then all my counter shields are down. I can't remove creatures at instant speed. It's just, no, I don't know about that. Unless it's a particularly important combo piece for, drawing 4 or 5 cards in a deck that has more mana than God. Maybe. But I don't even know about that, One thing I do kind of like about this is the 2 blue cost. I know everyone hates this mode on the card and thinks that it's stinky, but I will say 3 mana to draw 3 cards is really fantastic. Again, especially if you're comboing off in your turn and you've got more than 3 mana, right? You'll draw 3, you'll get your first, you'll get, crack at those cards before you say go. So, I kind of like the 3 blue cost or the 2 and a blue cost if you have like 7 or 8 mana. And then, or if you're playing against aggro, there's a point of the game where you really don't care if you give them more mana. Right. The scry kind of sucks, but what are they going to do? If it's turn 3 and you're up against an aggro deck, maybe they scry into their Embercleave or something. I'm not really sure. Right? Like maybe they scry into their Torbrand or something, but for the most part, if you're drawing 3 cards on turn 3, you're looking for a sweeper in a control deck, especially if you're tapping down to do that. So, maybe, because draw 3 cards is really powerful for 3 mana. Even if you're giving your opponent some ramp, especially depending on the deck you're playing against, that might not be such a bad idea. But ultimately, I just like Behold the Multiverse, like a million times better than a card like this. So I like Graven Lore way better than this. That's a card that you cast it and you win the game a lot of the time. So I'm just not too sure about this. Imagine paying 4 mana for this at sorcery speed and drawing a single card. I'm not too sure about that, but that is obviously like the worst case scenario. If you do have, 10 mana open to you on your turn because you just have a deck that makes mana, then maybe this is worth playing. But even in that case, I think Seagate Restoration is just a better card. I'm struggling finding ways to support this card's existence. I want to like it. Kind of a stinker, isn't it? So let's move on to rushed Rebirth here. Double R is black and a green for an instant. Choose target creature. When that creature dies this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser mana value, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Doesn't that seem serious? Doesn't that kind of seem very serious? Like possibly even modern playable, I would possibly. Just so much you can do with this, right? You can sacrifice the creature. Which is, I imagine, how this is going to be used 90% of the time, is you sacrifice the creature to some effect. But of course, it's instant speed, so if you block with a thing, right? Block with a thing, it dies, and you go get like a 3 or 2 drop or whatever, lesser mana value creature. So you put it right onto the battlefield, right? So you get any ETB triggers at instant speed. It's really sick, honestly. Like this card is something that brewers, wait their entire lives to see. I'm not actually sure the card does much in standard or historic or modern, but it looks like the kind of thing that almost certainly will. So, I don't want to hastily call this one of the more powerful cards in the set, because there's lots of ways that this could go wrong, and it requires a fair amount of opportunity cost, because you have to build your deck around it. So, there's definitely some problems with it, but just tutor up a creature, put it on the battlefield seems like a really powerful effect at instant speed to me for just 2 mana. All it requires is that you have a creature out. That's literally all. Just have a creature out. You have a 4-drop, go get your Luris. Seems pretty cute. So, I like a lot about this card. And, there's definitely things I imagine doing. You have a 6-drop, go get a 5-drop, and the implications of that are crazy. So, I really like the idea of this. Oh, one more thing I want to say about this is that we just saw, like, Luca the other day. And I think there's a couple of other cards that will, put a creature on the battlefield, but only for a moment. Only till the end of that turn. Like, I think Perforos does that, right? You sacrifice the creature at end step, or maybe it pops back to your hand, I forget. But either way, we have a couple of these effects in standard right now, and I like the idea of, rather than losing that creature, just rebirth it, right? It seems pretty cool. So, big fan of this, and I imagine there's probably something silly to do with it. But up next, let's take a look at a couple of cards that I haven't talked about yet, because, I wanted the last day to be more than 10 cards, and I knew that they were going to do this. I knew the last day was going to be 10 not-so-great cards, and so I saved some for the end. And some of these are really, really cool, too, like Mage Duel, for instance. Just a common, but really interesting. 2 and a green for a sorcery that costs 2 less to cast if you've already cast an instant or sorcery that turn. Target creature you control gets +1/+2 till end of turn, and then it fights a creature you don't control. Really, really cool right here. Just 1 green mana for a boost and a fight. I think that's probably worth, being this set's version of Prey Upon. I mean, we see a fight effect for a low amount of green mana in just about every set. And honestly, presupposing that you've already cast another instant or sorcery is, a pretty easy supposition to make a lot of the time. I mean, there's going to be a lot of instant and sorceries flying around in this set. So I imagine that in Limited, this is a really good removal piece in green, but this might even transcend into standard. Now, we do have some really good fight and bite effects this is competing with, so I don't know if that's absolutely true, but if there is a spell-based deck with green in it, this is a really good fight effect to, have available to you. So I do kind of like it. I wish it was instant speed. I think that would really help a lot, but even with the sorcery speed, just 1 green mana for the boost and the fight effect is actually pretty cool. Now, a common that I like to look up to is Pilgrim of the Ages. 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/1 spirit, and when it ETBs, you search your library for a basic plains, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. You can also pay 6 to just return this from the graveyard to your hand. All around, not a bad card, right? You get a body that also gets you a plains in your hand, so it kind of reminds me of the Birth of Melodus, sort of. But this can keep coming back, getting you more plains, fixing your lands if that's what you need, and just being a chump blocker, an occasional attacker, too. So even though the activated ability costs an awful lot, I actually wouldn't be surprised, especially after Birth rotates, if this saw play every now and again. I mean in like 2% of decks. I don't think this is going to see like a whole lot of standard play in its life cycle, but it is the kind of card that wouldn't surprise me if it popped up every now and again. Another common that I think might be pretty cool and limited is Blood Researcher. 3 mana, 1 a black and a green for a 2/2 Vampire Druid with Menace. And whenever you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, if you've got some pretty consistent ways of gaining life, I think this is a really good creature in limited, right? It's going to be a 3/3 with Menace for 3 mana before you know it, just after you gain life 1 time, right? You might be able to cast it, swing with a lifelink creature, and immediately make it a 3/3, which might be worth it. But as the game goes on, if you get this to 5/5, 6/6 with Menace, it's a real real threat your opponent has to start worrying about. So I'm not sure this sees a whole lot of play in Standard, although there are some cool plays with it, right? If you somehow figure out the mana and get this down with a Linden out, well, things can probably get pretty serious pretty quick because it's got this built-in like Heliod ability on it. So I don't know. It's a pretty cool card, but I don't really see it transcending in the Standard. I do like this in Limited where there's a fair number of ways to, just stapled on 2 cards to gain life in this format. Another card that I really like is Flunk. This is 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -X/-X till end of turn, where X is 7 minus the number of cards in that creature's controller's hand. So this card is terrible when your opponent has 7 cards in their hand, but that's not going to happen super often. In Limited, even if this is -2/-2 for 2 mana instant speed, that's still a really playable removal spell, and I imagine you play every copy of this that you get in Limited. Now, Standard, I think, is where the real conversation lies, because we've got Heartless Act, Eliminate, and a couple of other cards. Poison the Cup, if you want to play that. I mean, there are other options for 2 and 3 mana removal at instant speed in Standard. So where does this come in, and where does it fit? Now, one thing I want to say about this is that if you're playing against a control deck, right where, first of all, they're going to have 7 cards in their hand, or 6 cards in their hand, or 5 cards in their hand a lot of the time. All right, so this card's not going to feel very good against control. But the good thing about that is they're not going to really present you too many targets anyway. Like your Heartless Act and your Eliminate, especially Eliminate, are just dead against control anyway 90% of the time. So you're not really losing much in terms of opportunity cost. Which card do you include over which one? But Flunk kills Seasoned Hallowblade. It kills creatures protected by Selfless Savior fairly easily, whereas Heartless Act and Eliminate kind of have a hard time doing that. So against mono white or any aggro deck, really, your opponent's probably only going to have like 3, 4, 5 cards in their hand at the very most a lot of the games. So sometimes this is going to kill a Seasoned Hallowblade that's wearing a Maul of the Skyclaves even, like fairly easily. So I kind of like this card. Now, I think it might be sideboard removal, but it's pretty decent removal nonetheless. But now we're getting into some rare cards, y'all. Here's Elemental Expressionist right here. 4 red-blue hybrids for a 4/4 Orc Wizard with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, choose target creature you control. Until end of turn, it gains, if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. And when you exile this creature, create a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. So I guess the idea here is if your opponent is going to, point removal at one of your creatures, then in response, you cast an instant or sorcery, and then you turn the creature that they're trying to remove into a 4/4. And you can do that to Expressionists too, and I actually think that's kind of good. I think that's just kind of solid, especially if you cast this when you have 5 mana up and a 1 mana instant in your hand. Then suddenly this becomes really, really, really good, Even in combat, let's say your opponent doesn't have removal. Well, in combat, this ain't so bad either, right? Like maybe even you can ambush your opponent with it because you have tapped creatures and your opponent thinks it's kind of safe to swing in. Well, you can just cast instants and sorceries and exile some of your dudes and then bring them back as 4/4s untapped to block. Maybe they're bigger than they started. I don't know. I just think Expressionist is a really, really cool card, especially for the Limited environment, but I'm not really sure where it goes outside of that. But here's another cool 4-drop creature. It's Auric Lore Mage, 2 and 2 black for a 3/3 human warlock, and you can tap it to search your library for a card, put the card into your graveyard, and then shuffle your library. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Lore Mage. So that's kind of cool. Again, this has really cool implications for Limited, and I'm not sure how great it is in Constructed, right? A 4-drop that can be frostbitten, Heartless Acted really easily, whatever. And you have to wait to tap it to do a thing with it. And then when you tap it, it might not even do a really good thing. You throw an instant or sorcery in your yard, and you have to have some way to get real value out of that, outside of maybe escaping it or something. You have to draw a card that lets you put that card into your hand or cast it or whatever. There's just a lot of moving parts to actually doing the thing with this card. But if all you're doing is putting instants or sorceries in your graveyard for some small value and putting counters on Lore Mage, I could see the game getting pretty long pretty quick. And I could also imagine on certain board states there are spells that you don't want to draw, so it's okay to go through your library, thin it a little bit, and make sure you don't draw bad spells. So that's not bad either. But again, I don't see this going too far outside of Limited, but it does seem like the kind of thing that could take over a game of Limited given the chance. But here's a hot one. Baleful Mastery is 4 mana, 3 and a black for an instant, but you can pay 1 and a black rather than pay its cost. If the 1 black cost was paid, an opponent draws a card. exile target creature or planeswalker. Well, for 4 mana, this isn't quite playable by itself. We already have like Ink to Extinction in the format, which is just better, strictly better than this card. And it doesn't really see any play whatsoever. So I'm not too sure about it, but 1 and a black, 2 mana destroy an exile target creature or planeswalker is super sexy. Although I don't like letting your opponent draw a card. Right? It goes from 1-for-1 removal into kind of 2-for-1ing yourself. Your opponent goes up a card. Well, not up a card, but still. You lose a card, your opponent loses a card, but then they get a card back and you don't. That feels bad. I will say, for 2 mana, though, there are times at instant speed where you'll do this, right? Your opponent throws the Embercleave on an Anax, and you do this, 2 mana, instant speed, they lose their Anax. It exiles, too, so they don't even get creatures out of it. You don't have to worry about Embercleave till next turn, and you kind of don't care that you drew a card, or they drew a card, because you survived a turn. And I can definitely see this card being decent in that situation. And once you get to the point in the game where you can cast it for 4 mana, just cast it for 4 mana. Who cares, right? So, I mean, I do like it, but I don't know. I'm not as goo-goo over it as I see a lot of people being, oh, it's a wonderful, beautiful removal spell. And, like, I think it's simple. I think it's clean, but I'm not sure how much better it is than some of the removal we already have access to be honest. So let's look at Double Major. One of the cards that I'm like the most excited about all set. This is a green and a blue for an instant. Copy target creature spell you control, except it isn't legendary if the spell is legendary. This is silly. It's so silly. I mean, you're adding 2 mana to the cost of a creature, and that's actually a lot. That's so much, right? I mean, you can't just I've seen a lot of people with the misconception here. It does say copy target creature spell you control. That means you can't copy a creature that's already on the table. Otherwise, the card would be busted at 2 mana. Your spell has to be on the stack when you cast Double Major, just to clear that up in case you hadn't seen. But anyway, with your spell on the stack, you cast Double Major, and then you basically just get a copy of whatever creature you're casting. This is actually really sweet with flash creatures. End of your opponent's turn for 5 mana, you get 2 Brazen Borrowers. It's not actually that bad when you think about it, but obviously what you want to do with this is combos. You want to do stupid combos. You want to copy Orvar. Have 6 mana, play Orvar, copy it, and then get to doing like broken stuff. So that's what the card's actually for, and that's what we're gonna do with it. But I could actually imagine getting some real value out of this card just with some like relatively cheap creatures. But like on Scryfall's page right next to it is Dina Soul Steeper, and that is a creature that I really want to copy, and it only costs 4 mana to do that. So there are even legends in the format that you can get some real juice out of copying with Double Major. But all things considered, I'm just happy the card exists, not only for standard players, but historic, modern even, possibly, and commander players who I imagine are going to get the biggest kick out of this card. But let's move on to the Mythics. That's right, I left a couple of Mythics unveiled so far. Here's Mascot Exhibition, 7 mana of any old color for a sorcery, but it's a lesson. Create a 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying, a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token, and a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. So I'm not sure why the other 2 mascots aren't in here. Well, we don't get pests. Or the other one. There's another one. Anyway, we only get 3 mascots, but it's a total of 9 power, and 2 of it flies. And that's actually it's not that bad. It's really not. I mean, considering it doesn't take up a slot in your main deck, and it's kind of an Emeria's Call, it doesn't create as much flying power, but it creates more power than Emeria's Call, and any deck can play it. So, I imagine there's a possibility, especially in best of 1, where if you carry and learn cards, you just definitely play a copy of this. Because if you get late enough in the game to where you have the mana to cast it, you might as well go grab it, fill your board, put 9 damage on the table, threaten lethal or whatever. So, even though it doesn't look like an amazing spell, there's 0 opportunity cost, really, to playing it. So you might as well throw it in your sideboard if you got some learn stuff. And in that function, I think it's actually a pretty good card. But final Mythic of the day, and so final card of the set for spoiler season at least, and that's Mavinda, Student's Advocate. 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/3 legendary bird advisor with flying. 0 is the activated ability cost on this. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn if that spell doesn't target a creature you control. It costs 8 more to cast this way. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Activate only once each turn. So, I see this compared to Feather, but it looks kind of like a powered down Feather. Oddly enough, with Feather, it's got better stats at effectively the same mana cost. Although this is more playable in more decks because you don't have to play red, but it's still, Feather just has better stats at that mana cost and can play spells over and over and over, where you only really get one extra casting of the spell with this. One thing that is cool, that a lot of people just kind of brush off like it's not a big deal, is the fact that this lets you play whatever you want to, given that you have enough mana to do so. So, again, maybe we see some decks that generate just ridiculous amounts of mana, or a combo deck that does so somehow. And in that case, you could totally afford to pay the 8 more for a Genesis Ultimatum or whatever. I mean, if a deck can make 15 mana, go for it, kids. So, I don't know. I really like the idea that, like, it lets you play stuff if you have the mana, but that's probably not going to come up too much. Just as, like, a standard Feather type card, it's not terrible, especially considering this is a Magecraft set. So if you happen to get this in Limited, keep activating or, triggering that Magecraft, knock yourself out. But, in Standard, I could see some really cool stuff happening with this, and I like that. If you have 4 or 5 mana, you can probably do some really good stuff with it when it comes out, like Lurrus style. You don't ever really play Lurrus for when you only have 3 mana. You want to play Lurrus when you have 4 or 5 mana, you get some value off of it, even if it dies. And I think this card is going to be much the same. Now, you could also, I want to throw this out here, you can do this on your opponent's turn too. So if you have like some sort of protection spell in your graveyard, like a Fight is 1, for instance, then you can use that to protect Mavinda. So it might be a really popular play to effectively play this for 4 mana, leave a mana up, and then leave maybe 2 mana up and leave either a Fight is 1 or Sajiri Shelter or some similar spell in the yard to protect this, to make sure it can, you can untap with it on the board. So I think this is a good card that probably will see some amount of play, but we'll see if this is just like, oh, we lab with it the first week of the format and see if it's good enough, and it's not. Or it actually does do some really good stuff, because I think it could do some really good stuff, but you have to play the right deck. That said, right now there looks like there is a mono white deck, and I think we might have to wait until after rotation, because I think the Selfless Savior, All Seed of Life's Bounty, Maul of the Skyclave, Speaker of the Heavens, Seasoned Hallowed Blade, Luminarch Aspirant, like, we just build the entire deck. Like, I think that deck is probably better than the Magecraft mono white deck at this point, but that still remains to be seen. But if the Magecraft mono white deck does get off the ground, I think Mavinda might be an important late game card for it. That's it. That is all of the Strixhaven Wizards. So now it's time to, I guess, pick whichever school you belong to. Are we doing that? I'm just getting in the lab and building decks, because there's a ton of cards from the set that are like super cool. I don't know if they're good, but they're really cool looking, and I want to build decks with them. So I'm pretty excited about this set. I kind of feel like I did when Kaldheim came out. I don't know how good these cards are, but I know I want to play with them. And at the end of the day, I think that's what matters the most. So I'm pretty excited about playing on stream with this set and doing some weird, janky, stupid combos and stuff, because again, that's how I like to get down. So come join us on stream, or just subscribe to the channel for a lot of content coming up. Again, top 25 cards, top 10 sleepers, bunch of deck techs and all that. If you want to help us pick the deck techs that we do this season, again, link in the description of Patreon, $1 a month to do that. And of course, twitch.tv/spmtgdev if you want to check out the streams or any VODs that we've done up to now. Aside from that, if you want to pre-order any of this cool Strixhaven stuff, you can do that. Link in the description to TCG Player, because they got good prices. They got real good prices. Hard to deny. So if you want the prices, go over there, link in the description. But aside from that, I think I'm done for Strixhaven preview season. It's been a wild ride this time around, but just now it's your turn, right? Just let me know how you feel about it all down there in the comments section. Overall feelings on the set, and maybe I'll do a video about that, grade the set or something. But I want to know how you feel about it, because I think it's a cool set, but I know not everybody feels that way. So sound off down there in the sideboard, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.